not sure if you knew this, but this is an Andrea Mowry Stan account. Hello and welcome to Stitches and Starlight. My name is Tashiana, but you can call me Tashi because all my friends do, and we're friends now. I'm coming to you from my home in Brooklyn that I share with my husband Joshua and the two hell kittens, actual cats, not humans, Minerva and Astoria, and this is my corner of the internet where we talk about all the things that I'm spinning and knitting and sewing and potentially weaving. It is just fiber joy and wool chaos all the time. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on the thumbnail. There are a million voices vying for your attention on the internet, and you saw whatever this is and you decided to give it a go. And honestly, every day I open my YouTube feed and there are more and more Vlogmas videos. So the fact that you are so inundated with content and you decided to come here anyway, y'all, you're my people. If you're a returning viewer, you already know what time it is. Welcome back to the channel. Y'all, when I asked for questions or topics for Vlogmas sit and spins, everybody and their actual mama, everybody wanted to talk about sweater spinning. And even though I feel like I've covered grist a few times, people still want to talk about grist. So what I decided to do, I have another list taped to my TV. What I decided to do, we're going to talk about sweater spinning. We're going to talk about planning a sweater spin. We're going to talk about grist, briefly talk about grist. And then I made a list of all the things that if I had infinite time and resources, which I don't. I mean, I have enough fiber. I don't have time. I don't have infinite time. But if I had infinite time and infinite resources, these would be the things that I would be spinning for sweaters. So that's what we're talking about today. Let's go to the Fleece and Fiber source book so we can talk about Southdown. Now, I had a few people pop up in my comments with suggestions on how to spin Southdown. And I'm going to preface this. Okay, here's what I'm going to say. This is not my first time spinning a down breed. I've actually processed half a Suffolk fleece. I have spun Southdown and roving before. I've spun Dorset in roving. I've spun Dorset from fleece. So I know my way around a down breed. I always spin the downs in carded form, and I always spin them long draw. This is my first time being exposed to a down breed in top form, and having had that spinning experience, I think that the down breeds are better served in carded preps for a few reasons. Before we go to the Fleece and Fiber source book, for a few reasons, I find that of all the downs that I've worked with, the staple length is really variable. Like really variable. And I find that in top, you need some sort of consistency in your staple for like the top format to work. And staple lengths and down breeds can go from like 1 to like 3 inches in the same fleece. Now, that is true for everything, but I do find, and this is all my personal experience, you can take all this with a grain of salt. If you disagree with me, throw it out the window. We talked about this with the what I wish I knew when I was spinning. If you disagree with me and it does not suit your own spinning practice, throw it out the window. But I find that the down breeds tend to be the most variable in terms of like staple length and in terms of consistency. So I think they're better suited in carded preps where you could blend all that stuff up and spin it with a woolen draft. With this worsted prep, I was trying to spin a semi-woolen draft and it just was not working. So what I'm going to do, I talked to Rose about this when I opened the fiber because I shared my frustrations with her, and she was like, yes, spinning Southdown top is a very unique experience. We had talked about a few things. We had talked about maybe hand carding them into Rolags. I had even thought about putting the whole thing through my drum carder, but if I did that, I felt like I was losing the Advent experience. Now, this is my spin. I can do what I want with it. If this is your spin, you do what you want with it. Maybe somebody would, card it up, but I feel that if I'm going to appreciate the beautiful colors Rose gave me, I'm going to try to preserve the authenticity of the dye job as much as possible. And if I started hand carding things into Rolags or putting the whole thing on my drum carder, I would be significantly blending the colors and we might end up with mud, which, if you're new here, you might not know this, but I really enjoy mud. So I decided not to do that. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to spin it over the fold. I'm going to rip it into sections, I'm going to spin it over the fold, and I'm going to spin it long draw. This may work, and it might not, and you might watch me completely crash and burn and then pivot and do something else. That is the upside to sit and spins, is these are recorded as live as possible. I do edit like the dead space, and I edit me like blowing my nose 100 times, but these are pretty live. I don't do anything to them. I leave as much in the video as possible so you can see the spinning experience, and also so I don't have to do a ton of editing, because with your girl's full-time job, If I had to do a ton of editing every day, Vlogmas would not happen. We're just putting it 100% out there. To the Fleece and Fiber Source book, also known as the Sheet Bible. I already found what page we're supposed to be. So Southdown. Southdown is the grand ancestor of the down breeds. So the down breeds are called the down breeds because they're from the Downs of England. So there's like Southdown, Suffolk, Hampshire, Dorset Down. They're all from that region. So Southdown is the grand ancestor. What does it say? Fleece weight normally 4 to 6 pounds. Staple 1.5 to 4 inches, mostly 2 to 3 inches. That is huge variability. That is a lot of variability. Fiber diameters 23 to 29 microns for whites, 27 to 31 for black. Dense, resilient, medium grade fleeces with blocky rectangular staples that hold together and may be hard to distinguish from each other. And what does it say for spinning? These are nice, versatile, medium handling wools. Shorter fleeces can be carded. Longer ones will want to be flicked or combed. Spin to maintain the loft and springy character. Keep the drafting on the light side and twist at moderate levels. This is why I'm going to try to spin it from the fold. Because if I try to spin this short forward, I think I'm going to end up over managing it and putting too much twist in it, and I don't want to do that. Because as frustrating as the last experience was, oh, I've wound off all my singles onto weaving bobbins, by the way. Here is day 3. Here was day 3. And here was day 4. So these were both the white face woodland. Sorry, I have to cover my eyes so it focuses. These were both the white face woodland. And then here is day 5. This was the Southdown. So I have since transferred all my singles to weaving bobbins, but as much as the spinning experience in this was really frustrating, when I was winding it to the weaving bobbin, the yarn was actually pretty lofty. And I would say my consistency is maybe like a 80%, maybe like a 75-80. There are definitely slubs in the yarn from where I was getting frustrated. But it was definitely like a 75-80%. So I don't want to overspin and overmanage today. The present dance. Someone left me a comment, gosh, I need to start writing down names, that they now do a present dance every time they open advents. And I see you, babe. I see you. Day 6. What is in the package? I mean, we know it's more Southdown. That much I know. But what is it? I just realized that I'm very behind on my Melly Knits advent, and today is December 13th, and the last day I opened was day 3. And I hid it from myself, and I have to remember where I stashed it. Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so it's another day where there's a lot of white. I wonder if this was Rose's dye style for this advent. It's a fair amount of white. It has magenta and purple and brown, which is interesting. Here's what the top looks like together. So that's what today looks like. It has a fair amount of white, has magenta, has purple, has brown. I'm going to, straight out the gate, just pull off a little bit of this. And I'm gonna attempt to spin it from the fold. So if you haven't seen someone spin from the fold, God, I hope I do this right, and I don't disappoint. But you literally put it over the fold and you draft off the fold. And by doing this, you can turn a combed prep into a woolen prep and get a more woolen yarn. This is going to mix up the colors a little bit more than if I had spun it straight off the top, but I might not hate it if I do it this way. So let's get started because it is 6:27 and Mama has to go to work. Okay, I have started the spinning. I think it's cooperating, but also I am not, like, spinning over the fold is not the draft I am the best at. So if I get distracted while I'm talking today, it's because I am thinking very hard about this. This is not something that I do often, and it's not something that I really think I do well. So if I, get distracted, it's because I'm thinking about it. So you want to spin to knit a sweater. First off, congratulations. That's a huge undertaking. It is, I don't think it's as hard as people make it sound. It's literally like spin a bunch of fiber, make something out of it. But I get the concern because you need to spin a bunch of fiber. And if you're used to spinning a bunch of 4-ounce skeins, going from 4 ounces to 20 ounces can be a bit of adjustment. especially if you're someone who spins for the vibes and you're not like, you know, a consistent spinner or any of those other things. Now, there's something to be said for spinning your default yarn. You could just spin your default yarn for 20 ounces. And if you know what your default yarn is and you can like reliably reproduce your default yarn, there you go. You got a sweater spin. But let's talk about my process for starting a sweater spin. I have two ways of approaching a sweater spin. I could approach a sweater spin with a intended project, so then an intended yard weight and intended yardage in mind, or I could just spin a bunch of yarn and then find a project when it's over. And I do both actually. And oddly enough, I think I do the spin a bunch of yarn and find a project when it's over more often than I do the spin with an intended project in mind, because I work from raw a lot. And sometimes you get what you get. Like those Shetland lamb fleeces, I only have 11 ounces scoured, carded, and processed to spin. So I'm gonna get 11 ounces of yarn. I didn't really want to waste time thinking about what I would do with the yarn because I just figured I would spin it. I don't know if I'm going to do a 2-ply. I don't know if I'm going to do a 3-ply. I'm spinning that all on my spindles and I'm going to decide. I have completely like lost the plot on this. This is going to be half spun from the fold, half some woolen crazy mess. We're going to get yarn out of it, but it is going to be completely disorganized and I don't really know what I'm doing anymore, but I don't hate it as much as I did the other day. So we're going for it. I didn't start that spin with a project in mind. When I processed Marge, I didn't start that spin with a project in mind also because I didn't know. Like I sampled with Marge to figure out if I wanted to do a 2-ply or a 3-ply, but I didn't bother messing around with grist or any of those things because I didn't spin Marge with a project in mind. When I do spin with a project in mind, that's when grist and all those things matter. So there are two ways to approach large quantity spinning. If you just have a lot of fiber and you just want to spin yarn and then pick a project at the end, there is nothing wrong with that. Like there's no right or wrong way to spin for a sweater. I'm doing this again. What really matters is how much forethought you want to put into it. So let's say you have a project in mind and you know what you want to make, you know what you want your end product to be. So now you have to start working backwards. So you picked your project, you've picked your yarn weight because you picked your project, and you've picked your yardage. So you're working backwards to eventually have a knit garment. So what do? Well, you got to pick your fiber, and some fibers. Okay, so you have your project in mind, which means you have your yarn weight and you have your yardage and you need to start working. So the first thing you got to do is pick your fiber. And you can decide if you want to work from something you plan on processing yourself, if you want to work from dyed top, if you want to work from farm roving. There are a million options out there. Now there are some people who say that like this is again where we get into the dogma of sweater spinning, of spinning in general, because there are like spinning conventions. Most people will agree that 2-ply yarns tend to work better for lace because the plies oppose themselves and so they bloom really nicely. And then if you really want like a cabled sweater or you want like something that's going to have a lot of stitch definition, a 3-ply or a 4-ply yarn might be better to consider. So you got to consider what you want to make and your yarn structure. If you want to make something that's really drapey, then maybe consider bigging a fiber that has some long wool content, or something that has alpaca in it, or something that has silk in it. Like you got to consider the characteristics of the fiber in your yarn to help you figure out what you might want to spin for. And a lot of that you learn over time. A lot of that you can also learn. Did you see we completely gave up on spinning over the fold? I've completely given up. A lot of that you can also pick up from guides like the Fleece and Fiber Source Book, which talks about the characteristics of fiber. There's also a ton of resources out there on building yarn for a sweater spin. I will eventually get back to talking about how I pick and blend fibers. Maybe that might be something we do in one of the Q&As, how I build my fiber blends. But what I do is I consider the characteristics of each fleece. So if I have a Romney, that's going to have high luster, that's going to have high drape. If I have something like a Cormo, that's going to be super squishy and have a lot of bounce and a lot of resiliency, and it's going to make a really round yarn, but it might not have as much drape as the Romney. So those are and then if you have something with alpaca is going to keep you super warm. So that's something to consider because alpaca does keep you warmer than wool, but it is going to be a very drapey yarn. So you might have to change the ratios. If you're building your own sweater blend, You might want to experiment with the ratios of wool to alpaca to silk till you get a yarn that makes you happy, which is why the sampling process is so important. So let's say you're not building your own fiber blend, because that's like not graduate level, that's intermediate level sweater spinning. You're working from a fiber that's already existing. Maybe you found a braid of dye top that you really enjoy. Maybe you found some farm roving on Etsy, or you went to a wool show and you met a vendor that had 1.5 pounds of this thing that you really enjoyed, so you brought it home. The first thing you want to do is you want to sample. And the reason you want to sample, especially when you're spinning for a project in mind, is you are now working with a finite quantity of fiber. And unless you have unlimited access to the rest of this fiber, you have what you have. If you're working with dye top, there is no guarantee that dyer is going to dye that again so you can get more. And if you bought it at a fiber festival, there's no guarantee you're going to find that shepherd online and they have exactly more of the top the fiber that you've bought. So you are now working with a finite quantity of yarn, and you need to sample. And the sampling is so important for a few reasons. One, it saves you from heartache in the long run. If you spin this entire quantity of fiber and you get it off your nitty knotty and you realize you hate it, you hate the way you've spun it, you hate how much twist you've put into it, you just don't like the finished yarn, or you love the finished yarn, you spun it for a particular project and you get to the end and you don't have enough yarn, sampling helps save you from that sort of headache in the long run. Now, if you love your finished yarn and you don't have enough, you could always just pick a different project, right? But if you hate your finished yarn and you've spent months, because sweater spinning is a big undertaking, spinning for this yarn to then hate it, trust me, I've been there, which is why I advocate for sampling so much. So the first thing you want to do is you want to sample. And when I sample, I do anywhere from 5 to 10 grams. Everyone has their own number. I like to do 5 to 10 grams because it takes me sometimes that long to just get in the rhythm of spinning something. I mean, you saw with this Southdown, I started spinning over the fold, and then I started just rolling it up in my hands, and I've completely pivoted and just went back to continuous back, and I'm fighting with it that way because this feels the most comfortable, and over the fold I knew would have made me crazy. So it sometimes takes me a little bit of time to get in the rhythm of spinning something, which is why I give myself 5 to 10 grams to sample. The first few treadles on your wheel are nonsense. I would even argue that the first few yards of singles you spin are nonsense because you're still getting to know the fiber. You're trying to figure out your distance of draft. You're trying to figure out how much tension you need. You're trying to figure out how much twist this thing needs. You're like, oh, I started spinning this Southdown at 12 to 1 and realized, no, at 15 to 1 and realized, no, and downed it down to 15 to I started at 12, language. I started at 15 and took it down to 12. Mind you, I spun this fiber 2 days ago at 15 and it was working fine, but I guess my drafting is a little bit different today. I don't know, but I'm having a much better time with it at 12 to 1 than I did, so maybe I just needed to drop the ratio the other day. So those are the things that you figure out in the first few yards of your singles, which is why I think the first few yards of your singles are nonsense. So you need to give yourself enough fiber to sample with. Now, obviously, if you're working with a finite amount of fiber, you got to be smart about how much you use to sample because you don't have, infinite resources. But sampling is important. So you spin a little bit, you do a 2-ply back test, and you do your 3-ply back test. And I'll show you real quick how to do a ply back test. I'm just gonna get a little bit of length of singles. Now this will tell you a little bit of information about your finished yarn. And also let you figure out things like your twist angle and twist per inch and all that other stuff. It'll tell you how much twist you're putting in your singles. Maybe you're spinning a little bit too much of a robust single and you might want to put a little bit less twist. So you're going to pull back from your orifice, which is, I have a little bit too much tension on this, so I'm just going to take the tension down. Nope, let's hook it up. You're going to pull back from your orifice. You're going to use your finger. You're going to hold it here. So I'm pinching it here, and then I like to wrap it towards the orifice. This is too long. I should have done less. So I wrap it towards the orifice, and then I hope you can see what I'm doing. And then I just let it dangle a little bit. And I guide it through my fingers, and I let it dangle, and I let it dangle. And then I break it, I tie a knot to keep the twist in. And here's my 2-ply back sample. So here it is. Here's my 2-ply. Camera focus. Oh, the camera's not focusing. Okay, so I guess you don't get to see my sample. There it is. So there's my 2-ply plyback sample. Okay, and then I do the same thing for a 3-ply. So I pull some fiber off, and this time you do 1, and then you do 2. So you have 2 plies. Again, I wrap it towards the orifice, and then I kind of let it dangle between my fingers. And when I'm doing this, I'm just encouraging the twist to go down the little fiber, the little 3-ply yarn that I'm making. I pull it off, I tie it in a knot, and I have my 3-ply sample. So here's the 3-ply sample. How did I do this last time? There we go. So there's the, nope, there's a 3-ply sample. So I have my 2-ply plyback test, and I have my 3-ply. This is ridiculous how long I made the 2-ply plyback test. But I have my 2-ply plyback test, and I have my 3-ply plyback test. And I look at those 2 samples that I pulled off my wheel, and I go, those both feel really good. So I assess it for things like twist angle. I'm looking at this, just looking at it, this has like a 35-degree, maybe 35-degree twist angle. This is why I keep my little wheel spinning tool. God, we're getting really into technical spinning today. I keep my little wheel measuring tool, my yarn measuring tool on my wheel, and I check it for twist angle. So this plyback test has, yeah, it's exactly 30 degrees. I like to spin a 30-degree yarn for a sweater. I find that like 35 to 45, you get into that really like robust twist, which might be ideal for socks or ideal for weaving. So 30 to 35 is my favorite for sweater spinning. So I've spun my plyback test. I like the way it looks. I like the way it feels. It doesn't feel ropey. It still has a little bit of the elasticity of the fiber and the fiber content that I'm working with. I'm happy. I continue spinning. So now I have to continue spinning. I realized that I might have accidentally shot myself in the foot by doing this because I had finally gotten my tension to a place where I was happy, and then I took it all the way off to pull that plyback test out, and now I gotta fiddle with this tension again. So, you know, entertain yourselves while I figure this out. Okay, so you continue spinning your sample. So you've checked your plyback test. You're happy with how much twist you're putting into your singles. You're happy with the wraps per inch. So if you're spinning for like a DK weight yarn, I would check my 2-ply and my 3-ply plyback test against the wraps per inch tool and make sure that I'm getting, you know, close to the wraps per inch. Now, obviously some fibers bloom in the washing more than others. So if you're spinning a fine wool, you are going to get some poofing, but you know, you just want to have a guideline for where you are right now. This is where I would make my control card. So I would take, you know, I would pull off a length of singles and I would wrap it around an index card. And then I would take my 2-ply and my 3-ply plyback test. Those words get stuck in my mouth every single time. I would take my 2-ply and my 3-ply plyback test and I would put them on my control card. And that way, I have a reference for when it comes to spinning my full sweater spin of how much twist I put into things. I write things like my ratio. If I'm counting treadles, I write things. So like with this, like let's say I'm spinning with 5 treadles over 20 inches. So what that means is from my knee to my hip is about 20 inches. So if I was counting treadles, I would go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and. That's 5 treadles over 20 inches. I'm not doing that with this because I don't care enough. But sometimes with sweater spins, I do count treadles to make sure that I'm putting the same amount of twist in each length of yarn. And that's what counting treadles will tell you. It's telling you that you're putting the exact same amount of twist in each length of yarn before it winds onto the bobbin. So those are all the notes I make on my control card, in addition to a length of my singles, I have too much tension again. A length of my singles and my 2-ply and my 3-ply plyback test, so that while I'm spinning, I can check what I'm spinning against what I've spun, which is what my sample is. So I finish my singles, and then I either chain ply it if I'm doing a 3-ply, or I wind it into a center pull ball and I ply it from both ends if I'm doing a 2-ply. You know, I skein it up and I wash it. Your sample is not complete. Please, guys, your sample's not complete unless you finish it the way you plan on finishing your full yarn. Because a bunch of stuff happens in the water. Yarn blooms in the water, your yardage shrinks in the water if you're doing a fine wool. A bunch of things happen. And if you have not finished your sample the way you intend to finish your full sweater spin, your sample's not complete. So I finish my sample, and for the most part, the way I finish my samples is pretty consistent unless there's silk in the yarn. I put my yarn in really, really hot water. Well, I get hot water, I add Tufts Woolens wool wash, and then I put my yarn in that really, really hot water, and I leave it until the water cools. And the reason I do that is the hot water opens up the scales on the fiber. Now this only matters if you're not using superwash, because superwash, they've removed the scales. So if you're using superwash, do what feels good. But I put it in very, very hot water, not boiling water, but you know, hot water, to open up the scales so that the water and the soap can rush into the yarn and do the work of finishing the yarn. And then I leave it in there until the yarn cools and the water cools so that the scales close naturally. I'm not in the interest of shocking my yarn. There's techniques that, you know, let you go from hot to cold to hot to cold to shock your yarn and full and felt it, but this is a very gentle way of finishing your yarn. And then I don't, and again, we're talking about like the spinning police. Do what feels good, y'all. I don't thwack my yarns. I feel like if I've spent all this time being nice and gentle and spinning it, I'm not gonna go smack it against a wall. I know people who thwack every single yarn that they spin. That is their personal journey. That is the journey that they are on. I don't thwack my yarns. What I do is I hold it gently between my hands. I find the midpoints of the skein where I tied it off, and I just snap it. I go 1, 2, 3 to redistribute the twist, and then I go about 90 degrees, so I'm holding it at the different midpoint, and then I go 1, 2, 3 again to redistribute the twist, and then I hang it to dry. I do not weigh my yarns, because weighing your yarns, if your yarn has counterspin, if your yarn's not balanced out the washing and it has counterspin, and you weigh it to deal with that counterspin is gonna come right back. If you have too much twist in your final yarn that it's biasing, and you weigh it to like artificially deal with that biasing is gonna pop right back up in your fabric. Now there are some people who don't mind biasing, but I do. So I do not weigh my yarns. If there is any counterspin, if it's not balanced, I wanna see all of that in the finishing. And when I say a yarn is balanced, a finished skein of hand spun, if you hang it and it hangs straight and it doesn't twist on itself, it's a balanced yarn. Now most yarns do not come off your wheel balanced. And again, we're talking about spinning dogma. Ignore any of this if it doesn't matter to you. I like my yarns to not come off my wheel balance, because when you put yarn in the water, you're reactivating the twist in your singles. So if your yarn comes off your wheel balance and you put it in the water and you reactivate the twist in the singles, you might actually end up with an unbalanced yarn in the long run. And this is mites. These are all mites. So I prefer my yarn to come off my spinning wheel with actually a lot of spin, because when I put it in the water, that stuff tends to balance itself out. So you finish your sample, this is where you check your grist. And what grist, here's the important, grist is a pretty complex concept, but here's the important part about grist. What grist tells you is if you spin your sample, if you spin your finished yarn, if you spin your finished quantity of fiber the exact same way you spun your sample, grist will give you an estimate of how much yarn you should have at the end. So what grist is it's yards per pound. So if I spin a 20-gram sample and I got 100 yards, let's make this math easy. If I spin a 1-ounce sample and I have 100 yards finished, I have washed my yarn, I've finished my yarn, I've let it dry, and I have 100 yards. What grist will tell me is if I spin a pound of that fiber, at the end of it, I should have 1,600 yards. It's your yards per pound. So the formula for grist, it's yards divided by grams, because most of the time if you're spinning a sample, you're spinning it in grams. You're not spinning like a 3-ounce sample, unless, you know, do you. But it's yards divided by grams, and then it's multiplied by 454. It's actually multiplied by like 453.8 blah blah blah. I just rounded to 454. That decimal point does not, you know, throw me off in the long run. And that gives you your yards per pound. And that will tell you if you have enough fiber for your project. So if you check your yarn, and if you spin your yarn and your grist is like 1200 and you only have a pound of fiber and you need 1500 yards, you don't have enough fiber for your project. Now that could be a number of things. You could be spinning a really dense overspun yarn, and maybe you need to go back and sample again and spin a loftier yarn, because the more air you have in your yarn, the higher your grist is going to be. Now some fibers are going to be lower grist. So Romney, I keep talking about Romney because it's the long wool I prefer, but the long wools inherently are going to be lower grist fibers than the fine wools because the fibers are more dense. So there's just less fiber per ounce or per gram in a long wool than there is in a fine wool. So your grist is just going to be lower. So you got to consider all these things when you start a project. If you're planning on doing a long wool, you're going to need more fiber to get the same yardage than you are with a fine wool. That's just the nature of, you know, the fiber that you're working with. So you've checked your grist, you knit your sample swatch. No, we were just getting along. You check your grist and you knit your sample swatch, and your sample swatch is on gauge. Now the thing about, I find gauge to be, we're getting all my chaos crafting out and about today. I find gauge to be a wibbly wobbly concept. I'm just gonna put that out there. And Brenna and I talk about this a lot, that gauge is a wibbly wobbly concept, because I don't like knitting sweaters on toothpicks. I'm a big girl. Your girl has a 45-inch bust. I typically knit a 48 to 50-inch sweater. And I don't want to knit that on size 3 needles. So I have, in the past, with Brenna's full help and support, changed the pattern to knit a smaller size on larger needles so I don't have to knit as many stitches, which is why I say gauge is a wibbly wobbly concept. And Brenna actually has, I'm gonna have to ask her if she would mind sharing her knitting math calculator. She has like a knitting math calculator where if you put the pattern gauge in and you put what your gauge in, it'll tell you what size you need to knit to have the finished bust size that you need. It's my favorite thing she's ever shared with me. I'm gonna make a note to ask her if I can include that here. So that's why I say gauge is a wibbly wobbly concept, especially with hand spun. Like, it's not always super easy as much as we try. The nature of the beast is it's sometimes really hard to reproduce commercial yarn. That's just the nature of the beast. And also, if we wanted commercial yarn, we would have bought commercial yarn. Like, we're in it for the handmade. So, check your gauge. Use a knitting math calculator if you need one to figure out what yarn you need. This is what I do before I start, and I have all my details. I have my gauge swatch, I have my sample, I have my grist, and then I start spinning. And then the spinning takes, you know, whatever. It takes as long as it takes. If you're like me, you get distracted and you start 5 sweater spins at the same time. And you finish none of them. Or if you're like my friend Maya, who we're supposed to be spinning to knit the clay sweater together, you finish your sweater spin in like 3 weeks. Maya's a superhero. But you start your sweater spin. But a lot of the sweater spin, especially if you're spinning to knit a particular project, a lot of the work has to be done in the planning stage to save yourself, oh Lord, there's just this huge slab of gray stuff everywhere. To save yourself stress in the long run. Like, the planning stage is so important. And I would not skip it. Now, if you're spinning, again, if you're spinning your default yarn and you know that if you spin 4 ounces of Corriedale top at this way, you're gonna get this, maybe you can fudge the sampling process a little bit. But if this is your first big sweater spin, I would not skip any step of the sample process. It is so important. I do not recommend skipping it for your first sweater spin. Check your grist, knit your swatch, do all those things so that you'll enjoy the entire process and you're happy in the long run. So there is my dogma, as much as we talk about like spinning dogma. There's my spinning dogma on sweater spins and how I approach them. Again, for as much as I do the planning, there are a million projects where I'm just like, I'm gonna spin for the vibes, and whatever I get, and I'll find a project for it in the long run. So do whatever feels good. Do whatever feels good. But there were a few people who had questions on like the technical aspects of sweater spinning and how to get started. The other part of this, which it took me forever to just get through the how, is what do I... So this list is a bit of a cheat list because there's like 9 patterns on this list, but I've already started sweater spinning for 4 of them. So I feel like I'm cheating a little bit, but we'll do the ones that I've already started, and we'll do my dream patterns if I had infinite time and resources. So I really, really want to spin for a shift again, and I've actually started spinning my main color, and I'm 10 ounces into my spin for my main color, and then I abandoned that project because spinning that much top was making me crazy, and I abandoned the project and started spinning a bunch of woolen spins, and I forgot about it. And yesterday I was looking for a particular skein of yarn, and I found that project in a basket, and I'm 10 ounces into that spin. How does one lose 10 ounces of fiber? Your girl only knows. So I need to pick back up that project. I'm spinning a like pink and purple combo spin for the background color of my shift again. If I have pictures of it, I'll put a picture here, but I'm not sure that I do. But that is project 1. Project 2 that I've actually already spun all the yarn for, and I have yet to cast on the sweater. Y'all, why am I like this? It's the Junction Sweater by Andrea Mowry. So here's my thing. If you don't want to spin a full sweater quantity, one way to approach sweater spinning is if you see any project that has spin cycle or any of those color changing yarns, just get a 4-ounce braid of top and spin your own color changing yarn. That gives you a little bit of that like hand spun, handmade vibe to it, and then you can still use a commercial background yarn, or you could be nuts like me and spin both. I spun the background yarn from fleece and I spun the contrast color, and I just have yet to start. So maybe that'll be something that hops on my needles in 2024. I don't know. The other, oh God, this really is an Andrea Mowry stan account. The other thing I have that I've already started the spin for is the Traveler, which is her hoodie. And I started spinning for this when I saw Maggie of the Sonder podcast. She had a hand spun Traveler that she wore to Rhinebeck, and I full on lost my mind when I saw it. So I've already started spinning for it. I have 20 ounces of fig leaf and port from Hello Yarn. I'm spinning that from top because I just, again, okay, I always forget that my camera does this thing where it stops recording at 30 minutes and I need to like pay attention to how long I've been filming so it doesn't do that to me. So I'll just start talking again. I have 2 more that I've already started. I've started the Clay by Ozetta, which is what Maya and I are spinning together. Maya is making a lot more progress on hers than I am on mine. I'm spinning CVM Roving from, oh, I'm blanking. It's a CVM and mohair roving, and I don't remember the name of the farm, but I'm not processing my own fleece for that. I know at one point I had shared the Romney blends that I was working on, but I wasn't very inspired, and then I remembered I had 16 ounces of that lying around, so I'm spinning that instead. I'm maybe 3 ounces into that spin. I just have a bunch of sweater spins. I like sweater spins. And the other project that I've already started is my Weekender Crew, also by Andrea Mowry, that I'm spinning a carded, I did a big carded bat situation from like 6 braids of top. I actually have that here. Hold on. Here's 1 full bobbin. This is my like lavender mud spin is what I've been calling it. So I have 1 full bobbin and I'm halfway through bobbin 2. There's 7 ounces on that bobbin. I have 20 ounces to spin, so I'm halfway through bobbin 2. And I just need to pick it back up. The thing is, I just, you know, I get shiny squirrel syndrome. So I start a project and then shiny squirrel, and then I move on to something else. And the last sweater spin that I've already started is, I don't know if I'm spinning the main color, but I am spinning a combo spin for the background color. It's the Anju by Skinny Dipping, because I saw, forget her name, but Black Cat Knitting was wearing it to Rhinebeck, and I completely fell in love with her version. She was wearing a spin cycle version, and I was like, cool, I can make that yarn. So that is the other thing. But those are the things that I already have on my wheels, which is entirely too many sweater spins. Like, sorry about the sirens. It is 7:03. I don't understand why there's sirens outside this morning, but it's very early for sirens to be out and about. I have so many sweater spins ongoing. But if I could start a few more, if I had infinite time and resources. Here's how I pick sweater spins. Besides picking for color, if I'm spinning one fiber, I like to spin for texture. I like to spin really round, plump yarns for like textured stitches. I haven't really gotten into lace, so I don't know if I would spin for lace, but I do really enjoy textured stitches. As much as I like say I don't knit cables, I keep starting cable projects, so maybe one of these days I will just say I enjoy the idea of cables, and the execution of cables is not my jam. But the first pattern on my list is a cabled vest. It's the Frisky Witch by Thea Coleman. I just think it would look so good in a like sheep to skein project, like in a fleece project. I think that vest would look so good. I loved the cables in it. I love the texture. I love the architecture of it. It's a really good, it just looks really great. And also because it's a vest, there's no sleeves, so it's not as much yardage, and it's an Aran weight yarn, so I could just spin a really round, really plump 3-ply, and I'd be good to go. The other thing I have on my list is the Woodwardia by Lydia Gluck, and that I think is from the Pom Pom Ready Set Raglan. I think it's a Pom Pom Ready Set Raglan book, and I just love the lace work at the raglan detailing, and then I love the shape of it. I love the big, like, I think it's a folded collar, and it's like, it has a lot of ease. It just feels very like elevated sweatshirt material, and I think in like a silver fleece would just be like a silver gray charcoal fleece would just be absolutely beautiful. What else is on my list? I have another cabled vest. It's the Lana vest by Irene Lynn. And I think I've seen a few people actually make it. I was talking to Beth at Spin Delicious about potentially dyeing some fleece for me, because that's just one rabbit hole I don't want to go down. And maybe dyeing a few, like dyeing a heathered fleece situation for me. So dyeing a few colors for me that I could then bring home and blend on my Carter and heather and make like a fun heathered yarn. And I think if I did that, I would do a bunch of shades of green and knit it into the Lana vest by Irene Lynn. There aren't enough hours in the day for all the things that I want to make. That's just really what it boils down to. There just aren't enough hours in the day. I can sit here and daydream from here to kingdom come, but there just aren't enough hours in the day. And then as far as spinning to knit two things that have the fun color changing yarn, I would love to spin to knit a Calypso by Black Cat Knitting. I just really enjoy the colorwork yoke in that situation. I love the flowers, I love the stitch pattern, and then I think having it in a color changing yarn would be absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's written for spin cycle, so anytime something's written for spin cycle, I feel pretty comfortable swapping it for a color changing yarn. And then there's also the Silver Lining by Jennifer Steinglass. I think any Jennifer Steinglass pattern would be a good canvas for handspun, because most of her patterns are written for color work and they look beautiful in a really subtle color changing yarn. So those are all patterns where you could spin the whole thing, or you could just spin the contrast color and have a little bit of handspun detailing around your neck, and then you don't have to worry about spinning the whole sweater quantity. But if I had infinite time and infinite resources, and maybe I could do the spinning and send someone else to do the knitting, those would be all the handspun garments that I would have in my wardrobe by the end of next year. I really need to get back to work on my sweater spins. I just need to stop getting distracted, which easier said than done, because again, shiny squirrel brain. And I'm not mad at the shiny squirrel brain. The shiny squirrel brain is mine. I could spend time being upset with it, or I could just be like, yeah, this is just how my brain works, and I get easily distracted, and I was talking to one of my friends about this. I find that I enjoy more the dopamine rush I get from starting projects than I do from finishing. Like, some people are completionists and they really enjoy the pat on the back you get from like finishing a project, and I enjoy chasing that rush of starting something new. So I'm constantly starting things and very rarely finishing them, and I'm not unhappy about that. It just means that, like, if you come here to see these visions realized, you might have a long time to wait, because the visions don't always get realized. But that's it for today. I think that's it for today. I hope like this sweater spinning situation was informative. Sometimes the stream of consciousness while I'm spinning, I have like all these things that I want to say, and then I start talking and I watch it back and I'm like, did I say any of the things I wanted to say? So I hope that this helped. And if you feel like there was something that could have been a little bit more clearer, let me know in the comments and I will get to you when I have the spoons and the resources to do so. I really do want to empower spinners everywhere to tackle these big projects. And when I say like sweater spinning, it could be shawl spinning. It could be any big project. It doesn't have to be garments. It's just everyone's been asking me about garment spinning. But it doesn't have to be garments. You can spin for a shawl. You can spin for whatever your heart's desire. I mean, for a shawl, like grist and gauge is like less important. I guess grist still matters. You still need your yardage. But gauge is less important because, you know, it's a shawl. Who cares? God, please don't get mad at me because I said that. But it's a shawl, so who cares? But yeah, I hope you feel really empowered to tackle a big spinning project in the near future, or to start daydreaming about a big spinning project. I do think I'm going to try to share a little bit more about how I pick fibers for a sweater spin. I don't know if I'm going to get to that in December, because that might be its own, like, maybe we'll talk about it during one of the actual vlog episodes, during one of the like vlog episodes of Vlogmas. Maybe I'll try to do that. I'll try to include a little bit about picking fibers for a sweater spin and blending and doing all of that. But that's it. The Southdown and I got along a lot better today. I don't know. Maybe it was just, it reacted weirdly to the dyes that was used on day 5. Because fiber can react interestingly to different color dyes. But the fiber and I got along a lot better today. And I'm really happy that I switched from over the fold to the default spin. And I didn't spend so long agonizing over it, because this was actually a much better experience. So I don't take back, because the day 5 struggle was real, but the day 6 struggle, less real. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Go make something fun today. I love you. I'll see you around for future Vlogmas videos. Happy December, happy season of Starlight, and I hope that this season is treating you and all of your families well. I'll see you.